Right, the recording has started. Hello, hello. This is, I don't know why you're watching this if you don't know who we are, but I'm Kate. My pronouns are she, her.
I'm an onion. My pronouns are he, him.
Uh, we just finished watching I guess, eighth or ninth, depending on whether you believe that the other epilogue
Depending on your
exists. I
religion.
don't know, Kyoukai movie. Mirai Fukuin, which is my favorite one, and I've seen a fair number of times. John, I'm interested in what your thoughts are.
Um, I mean, I liked it. Uh, I agree with you in that I think it's a really fitting epilogue for the series. And it's a really good epilogue overall. Um, the one thing I will say, and this is like not indicative of an overall like feeling towards the movie, is that a lot of the like conversations and exposition was just felt a little empty from like a visual standpoint. Like it was a lot of
Mm.
just like long wide shots of them walking, and it felt like they could have done better to like, you know, maybe pace it a little better, or make the script a little more streamlined. But that's really my only like major form complaint. Other than that, like it did pretty much everything it set out to do really well. Um, it's a significantly better like time shuffle, like, oh, future past, so we're gonna switch it up temporally. It does a much better job, I think, of that than Mujin Rasen does.
Yeah, that's one of the things I like a lot about it is that there's
Or
quite a
maybe
lot of
much more
jumping
to my
around in the
taste.
timeline. Yeah, there's quite a lot of jumping around in the timeline, but it's not only much more comprehensible, but also like each jump is either there for a thematic reason or to make it flow better, like to split up long dialogues. Um,
Yeah,
and each
it's a
cut,
much
there's
better
like a
aesthetic
logical
choice.
connection between like where you're coming from and where you're going.
Like the aesthetic of Mujin Rasen with all the mixed up is kind the aesthetic is to be confusing, whereas like the way they do it in this like actually contributes to a greater tone. Um,
Yeah, and theme. This movie has themes.
Precisely. Yeah. Well,
Yeah,
what are those?
where it's an oasis.
Not theme ideas?
I know, right? We're, you know, I'm 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 not starving. I guess
Famished?
dehydrated and yeah, and I'm to an oasis. This movie. I'm just lapping it up. Um, yeah, I mean, I would say the main reason why I like this movie the most is just because it has theme. Like it has actually has something that it's like very specifically trying to accomplish. Um, and we can, you know, we're not gonna just be like talking about it in vague terms this whole time, but I don't know if I want to dive in just yet. Um, and so like, unlike the other movies, you're not left trying to infer like what maybe the intention was. Like there's a message that you can refer back to and be like, does this contribute or not contribute? And usually the answer is that it works, right? Like it's all like, building towards the central theme. The other thing that I like a lot about it, and this is getting into sort of like, it's a movie where most things are related, so this is almost sort of jumping in its own way. But one of the things that I like the most about it is that it doesn't actually prominently feature the main characters of the rest of the story. Um,
Yeah, I really liked the second half, basically.
yeah, well, by second half, I assume you mean the
Well,
part that's in the future. It's really more of a third act.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Um, yeah,
Time-wise,
like
it felt like similar length, but
yeah. I mean, the first like the thing you have to realize is that the part with Seo in the opening and then the
oh
part
yeah,
with
that's
Seo
true.
all the way up until like is quite long. Yeah, like
Yeah.
there's two acts there. Um, well, there's an act that's like basically Seo, and then there's the conversation in the cafe interleaved with Shiki and I guess Meruka. Um, so yeah, Kuramitsu. And then the third act is of course the epilogue in 2010. And in all cases, I mean, like, yeah, it's true that like, of course, in the first two acts, like Kokuto and Shiki are like very present, but it's not, they're not the main characters, right? It's not about them. It's about Seo and Kuramitsu, which I really like.
Yep, I
You
like
know,
that a
as
lot
much
as
as I
well.
like Shiki as a character, and honestly, I mean, to say Shiki doesn't feature prominently is maybe not quite right, because of course, like, there
Well, she
is
features
a,
prominently without necessarily being the main character or
yeah,
a
well,
main character.
but she's one of the, or you know, it might be more accurate to say that male Shiki is one of the main characters of this installment, um, because despite having like very little screen time, like, he's extremely relevant to the themes, and it's, you know, I don't know that I would say it's interspersed throughout, but at the very least, he's like, you know, significant to the third act. Um, but yeah, I mean, anyway, it good.
Yeah. So, do you want to dive into the themes now? Is that,
Yeah, well, I mean, basically, it's just going to be me saying what my interpretation of the movie is, right?
in other words, if you're gonna take a drink can and shoot it into a trash can and be like, Kobe, it's not fun. It's less interesting if you always make it. You have to miss sometimes. That's the theme of the movie.
Yeah, that's one way of putting it. Sort of. I Yeah, I mean, I think that that's like almost ancillary. It's like a,
Yeah, no,
and this
yeah,
makes me a nerd, but it's like a lemma. Um, do you know what a lemma is?
I do not.
It's so in a mathematical proof, a lemma is something that you prove that isn't what you're trying to prove, but it's something that you need in order to prove what you're trying to prove.
Mm,
um, you know, I think it like that message is a significant message that the movie does like make, you know, and not just assert. um, but I also don't think that it's its primary goal. I think it's like something that it does along the way. My
yeah, I was
interpretation
more
of the
just
movie is
clowning
that, yeah, I mean, that's totally
because
fair, right?
when when he's up on the roof, he shoots it and he misses, and then it like
Yeah.
cuts to his face for like 5 seconds, and I was just like giggling a little
Well,
bit.
but I think that that's, you know, I mean, even as a
Oh,
joke, like,
like
it's
yeah.
a fair distillation
Oh no,
of
no, no. Like
a lot of what
I was
Madoka is
giggling not
about,
because
right?
it wasn't like serious or like
Yeah, yeah,
um well serviced for the themes. It was more just like I was giggling because like I was imagining him being like Kobe, and then yeah.
yeah,
Anyways,
yeah. And I guess I should be calling him. So just to be clear, I think he's Kuramitsu Meruka is like him as the Bomberman,
yeah,
and
and then Mitsuru is
Kamekura
him
Mitsuru
afterwards.
Mitsuru is like his real name, and that's like who he is
Mm,
after.
okay.
So yeah, I mean, you know, like, there's the obvious lines that tie into exactly what you're saying, where he's like, you know, there was a boy who could see a future in which he succeeded and thus could only abide by it, and I was freed from my fateful future, and what I obtained in exchange was a life full of failure. Right? You know, I absolutely agree that that's a huge part of like him and his character, and therefore it's a pretty big part of the movie. But I think that if I had to like summarize the overall like thrust of the movie, I would say that what it's doing is it's discussing like the future, as kind of an analogy to like the ends of stories and death. And the reason why, like, those two things are, like, you could almost say it's one or the other, right? The reason why I don't just say death is because it also, you know, like, Mitsuru, it's not necessarily like he didn't die, but he died. Like the line where he says, you know, the story that I was a protagonist in ended 10 years ago, but maybe I can still play a part in someone else's, right? And in many ways, the movie, in as you know, being an epilogue, it is sort of about getting the viewers on board with the fact that they're not going to see any more of these characters. Like, that's not really death so much as it is the end of a story, right? Like, there's a subtle difference, but you know, and you know, you could say that it's about one of those things as a metaphor for the other. You know, like, you could say that it's death, and that, you know, like, Kuramitsu Meruka, I keep saying the wrong name, but and you know, how Mitsuru is like, oh, you know, like, I'm not the protagonist anymore. Like, maybe you could say that's just a metaphor for death. I don't think it's like that. Like, if we wanted to do like a video essay or like just a super close reading, I think you would want to like sort out like what precisely you thought it was. But you know, overall, like, it's an ending that's about endings. And in terms of like what it has to say about endings, like, it's kind of an exploration of like a bunch of different well, a bunch, like I would say like two or three different people's like journeys to like accepting death, or like accepting that their story is over. Um, so like, uh, I've already talked about Mitsuru. Obviously, he's okay with not being like the protagonist of a story because like he is a minor character in Mana's life, right? And of course, male Shiki, he's like okay with dying because he knows that female Shiki will live on and live out his dream. Um, and like Seo, it's a little bit less like obvious or like straightforward, I guess I should say. Um, but like her whole story is about like accepting an uncertain future, right? Um, which is why again I hesitate to say that it's necessarily like about death, right? Like it's almost like it could be that like death is just one of many futures that the movie is interested in exploring.
Yeah, in a very general sense, it feels about change more than anything else.
Yeah. Um, yeah, I mean, I think it would probably be like like you might be able to synthesize everything that the movie is doing and say like this is what it's about, but it might be better to say like okay, it's about like a couple different things, right? I mean, like that's why we
Exactly.
talk about
Yeah.
themes and not just like this is what the movie is. um
Yeah. I mean,
like
it's
there's
important
the
to
theme of like
generalize, but
failure
also
being
you need
important,
to.
yeah, and there's the theme of like accepting death because like other things will go on anyway. um and I guess there's the theme of like uncertainty being like an important part of the human experience. And that's of course reflected in Shi's monologue after she like cuts the future, as well as of course Seo's whole story.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a good movie. um, personally I don't have as much of an issue with the dialogue because it makes sense, right? Like for
Yeah.
the
I
most
mean,
part it's
it's
all
like I'm not.
like,
It's a lot better than the other movies.
yeah, and there are
Especially
like,
stuff like 1 and 3, or 1 and 2, and then 6.
yeah.
Like, but it's
And,
still I'm more just like you know I was specifically thinking of like before the bridge scene when it was like a 10 or 15-second wide shot of her
oh,
walking,
walking along the river,
and
yeah.
then just like cutting back and forth, and like there was another one that
Yeah,
was
they didn't
a
necessarily
little
need to do the
not as visually
wiki
interesting.
thing where she's like, oh, like you have to be at the scene, you have to be the camera. Like, that's kind of maybe a minor
Yeah, we
like
can connect
Nasuverse
those
thing of
dots
explaining
too.
how his power works. So yeah, I mean, that scene probably could have been sped up. I can agree with that. But like, I mean, like for me at least, what I take away from the
Yeah,
dialogue is
I'm not
like the
thinking
Toko
speed as
monologues,
much
for
as just
example,
like
are good,
presentation. Like
amazingly.
like they could have uh cut to the conversation a little better,
Mm.
rather than just putting a very static backdrop of like long walking with no cut. Like, I don't know. It made it
That
very easy to just kind of zone out.
Sure.
Um,
I
but
mean, the
that's
movie
just
had
me.
also been pretty slow up until that point. Like that's like the first action scene, so it's understandable. Um, yeah, I mean, like for my part, personally, I like the fact that the Toko monologues are good actually, which is like insane to me.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah. The Toko monologues are not included in my point about
yeah,
the dialogue and
because like
in certain scenes.
first of all, they're split up. Like they never spend very long just having her talking. Like they have it interspersed where different characters like remember talking to her at times where what she was saying is relevant. Um, right, and then also of course the visuals during those talks are you know they're doing interesting things whenever Toko is talking. Like there's when she's talking about premonition, or prediction, like when she holds up her fingers and it's like if we have like victim A and murderer B, and she's literally holding up her fingers in front of Kokuto and Shiki, and it's like it's just like a funny little shot, right?
Yeah,
And then she's playing on her Game Boy, and the little dialogue is like, "Take me along, big sister." Like, I could help you with your magic. And she's like, no. And it's like, oh, you're so mean, sis. And it's like it's just like a funny little Easter egg for like Nasuverse fans who are like, hey, it's like Aoko, you know, it's like they're sisters that hate each other. And then when she's talking about evaluation and it shows the shot of all the CRTs with them blinking off one by one, like, you know, they're using the fact that it's a visual medium well for once.
Yeah, I think it was the presence of those like moments that made like just the long drawn out like under um I don't know, under planned, I guess. Like obviously being very spacey is its own direction, but it just felt like it wasn't what those scenes needed. It's really
I'm
like
not quite
it's
sure
not
what
a
you
big
mean.
thing.
Like, what are you
Um,
referring to specifically?
I'm like I really think a lot
Are we still
about
talking about
um
the like, bridge scene or
yeah, it's the bridge scene and there was something before that too that I forget.
like the cafe
Um,
scene, like
yeah, I
Bomberman
mean
monologue scenes?
like the cafe scene like
Yeah, the thing about the
it was
cafe scene
there
is
were
it's
just
definitely
moments
one
of
of
the
the weak
cafe
points of the
scene that
movie.
were yeah, like there were moments of the like there were moments of the cafe scene that were like okay, like we're going somewhere, and then there were moments where it just kind of like
Yeah,
I don't
I
know, it
think
feels like it
a,
drops the thread
a big
almost,
reason for that is
or the
because there are some
the
lines that are
tightness of the
translated really
thread.
poorly. Um,
That's fair.
the
Like
dialogue
that's
I
the
think
other
works
thing with
pretty well in
watching
Japanese. Yeah,
subtitles.
the subs like for this movie are kind of bad in a lot of ways. Like they're not like terrible. They're definitely not as bad as like some of the other movies in this series. But yeah, I mean, you know, I hate to say like, oh, just take me on my word for it, but like I noticed a couple of times where like the subs were wrong in a way that like kind of dropped the logical thread of the conversation, and I was like, okay, well, I hope that's not like, you know.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, like I agree that the cafe scene is probably one of the weaker things in the movie. Like it is sort of, you know, like almost a majority of the second act. So I wouldn't say that it's like weak, like absolutely, but it's sort of relatively weak. And in particular, like, you know, the fact that it's like just a conversation, and the fact that like, you know, Seo like quote unquote falls in love with Mikia, like it, you know, it just makes it kind of cheesy. Um,
I mean,
you know, like
I thought that was funny.
it's
I
yeah,
thought
I think that
when
it's
they went
played
for
for
that, I thought it
humor.
was
So like I
yeah,
don't think it's too bad. But like
I
given
agree.
the rest of the series where like every single like female side character falls in love with him, it like it strikes a nerve, you know what I mean?
Fair. Yeah.
Yeah. But again, yeah, like in this movie in a vacuum I certainly don't think it's a problem because it is definitely played for humor in a way that works. Um, what
And I feel
else?
like a lot of the people who have fallen in love with Mikia have been very like Fujo Kirie was very like, you know, dark and or not, you know, like quiet and brooding kind of. Whereas like, you know, she's like in the cafe and she's like like, you know, can I is it okay if I call you Mikia-san? Or like the way she says it, like it's just I don't know. It
Yeah.
feels like it's from another anime and that made me laugh.
Yeah, the her voice acting is really good for like
It is.
what the scenes are trying to accomplish. I agree. And there's a couple really good cuts too, like, you know,
I should
cuz
know who it is, but I don't know who it
it's
is.
Iguchi Yuka.
Yeah,
Yuka Iguchi. I don't know what order. The thing
Iguchi
about people
Yuka.
whose names I've only ever seen on my anime list is I have no idea which one is their surname.
The surname is
Cuz
always first on Mel.
on Mal, okay. Yeah, I mean like who knows? I guess maybe it's more that I see it in a lot of places. But yeah,
Yeah.
it's Tsukihi. Um, anyway, like yeah, there's also cuts in that conversation that I think like if there were more of them, I don't know that it would be better, but like they helped to spice up where they are. Like for example, the shot where she's like, you know, were you listening to me at all? And it's like from a little from like it's like a shot from the table, and she like leans over her coffee. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, like it you know I think like the themes of the movie belie the fact that like well not really actually, but anyway the point is like that I'm trying to make is that the first two acts are like very much doing multiple things, in that they are also kind of slice of life. And the third also in its own way. Now that like the whole movie is, a fair portion of it is devoted to slice of life, um, which you wouldn't necessarily expect to work. And it's funny to me that like the one movie in the series that has like comprehensible and well executed themes also spends a ton of its time on slice of life. Um, but
I think part of the reason why I was a little like I noticed the dialogue, the the directing during the dialogue scenes like a
mm,
little more was because like the shot composition is just so good every other part of the movie. Like it's just such a like tight, like well framed, like good mise en scène like everywhere basically.
mm.
And then I mean like mise en scène and everything is still good. It's just like the shots get so much longer and
Yeah,
it
well,
like and then it's
dialogue is
all
kind
wide
of
shots
the
during certain
eternal
dialogue
enemy
scenes.
of
Yeah.
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 It's understandable, it doesn't mean it's not bad, but yeah.
Yeah. But like thinking specifically about like going to Mother of Mifune's like fortune telling sequence,
Yeah.
like the almost like Ikuhara it esque like like just sequence and then repeat it every time we go there and then every time we leave. Um, it's it, it's really striking and it's just I like it a lot.
Yeah. I agree. It gives her like such an aura of mystery. Like, and she's such a weird character. Like, why is she just in
Yeah.
this like random back alley? Yeah, for sure. Like,
Yeah, and like and, like I'm just thinking specifically of like the up angle with like the right angle of the alley in the sky
right, yeah, that's like
that
really
they do
brightly lit
twice.
that first
It's
time,
really
and then
brightly lit the first time with Shiki, and then with
with Mana,
Mana, it's
it's
like
like
a
dark.
evening like clouds. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's just such a good looking shot.
Yeah, it almost
Like
reminds me of
it
that one
works
shot
so
in
well.
Rebellion. Um,
I
well, I say
sorry.
almost. It varies. It's very similar to another shot in Rebellion where, like, it's right after Sayaka rescues Homura from Mami, and like they finish their conversation and she runs away. There's a similar shot where it's
I
like
don't remember it.
it's
Yeah,
it's a shot at the sky in
not
like an
that
alleyway
specifically.
where like the walls are like 90% pipes. And like except the difference is that this shot is like almost a rotating one. I mean, it doesn't physically make sense, right? But it's a similar like right angle, like shot looking at the sky, except like the walls are like moving relative to one another and they like slowly close. Anyway, it's not really relevant. It's just a similar looking shot.
Yeah. But the movie overall just looks really good. Um,
Yeah, it was made I think significantly later than the rest. And I
yeah,
don't
I
I don't
think
know
because
much that affects
I
the novel.
remember thinking like, holy shit, UFO table really polished up, like, or they hired somebody who's really polished with storyboarding it.
Yeah,
Like,
I mean, like the one thing that this series has always done well is background art. But like now everything else
well,
is on
but
point, and so it
yeah,
looks really
exactly.
good.
It's not so much the quality of art as much as is the direction and like the choice of what to show and from what angle and how to show it rather
Mm.
than oh it's so detailed like ooh look at this it looks almost like a photo
Yeah, well, I think I'm pretty sure that some
like
of the
it
background art
does.
in the original seven are in fact photos.
Yeah, I mean
Which like
that
put
doesn't
it.
make them bad. Doesn't
Yeah,
make them
I'd rather more
you know
anime do that. Please put a photo through a filter. It looks better than your like
yeah,
shitty like MS Paint. You know,
yeah, not even MS Paint, like whatever the fuck like JoJo backgrounds are.
repeated patterns, like the same like tile texture.
Yeah,
Anyway,
we just have one sponge brush and just
yeah, yeah. Um, yeah. I mean, it's a good movie. it's harder to talk about things that are good than it is to talk about things that are bad, because talking about something
Yeah.
that's good requires a certain amount of like rigor, and like, I don't know, like thoroughness. Because I mean, it's one thing to talk about. I guess it's one thing to talk about something that's good, and another thing to like try and like show or prove to someone that it's good. In the latter case, you
Yeah.
like definitely need to be like on your feet, because there's sort of a standard that you have to meet. Because anyone will
Yeah.
believe you if you say something's bad, but if you say something's good, it's like you've got a burden of proof. Um,
Yeah.
but I don't know that. I mean, that's not our goal here. Like, I'm not trying to convince anyone that the movie is good so much as just
Yeah. I
share
mean,
our
it's
thoughts on
good.
it. Yeah, if you don't believe us, go watch it. And if you don't agree with us, fuck you.
Yeah. You're wrong. Your opinion is valueless.
Yeah, you hear that?
You
Take
heard it here
that.
first.
Um, yeah, I like the movie. Um,
I also like the movie.
yeah, like I may be repeating myself here, but I really do feel like it delivers on a lot of what you'd expect from the other seven. In that, even though it only spends like a little bit of time on it at the end, like a real, like, even if it's like just, it's sort of bare on dialogue, right? So it ends up being like kind of suggestive, and there's a lot of inference that you have to do, but like it actually like explores the question of like Shiki choosing to die for Shiki, male Shiki choosing to die for female Shiki's sake. And it's like, wow, look at that. Like, amazing, you know? Like, what would it take for someone to sacrifice themselves? Like, what does acceptance of death look like? Like, hey, they actually did it.
Yeah. Of all the things that do like big that skip a big chunk of time right at the end to like, briefly show the main characters like 10 years later, or 5 years later, however many years later. Like this is I think my favorite one.
Oh
Um
yeah, and actually, yeah. I mean, this I could
Mainly
talk about a bit,
because
right? But go ahead.
mainly because it's not following the main characters. It's
Yeah,
following Mana and Mitsuru.
and
And you basically only see Shiki in a flashback, and you don't even see Kokuto, I think.
yeah, Kokuso
You
does
don't
not
see
appear at
Kokuto.
all. Yeah,
Yeah. And so
yeah.
it's just like, oh, like, you get like it's like looking, it's like the camera from outside just observing.
Well, but and this is what I meant when I said that like everything in the movie is kind of connected, and like it is in some ways like an ending about endings. Like, the fact that it doesn't, it shows the main characters through like the effect that they have on their surroundings, right? Like it
Yeah.
shows things that are directly related to the main characters, but not the main characters themselves. And this is a movie where you have characters that are like, yeah, like I'm okay with death because like you know I will leave a mark on the world, or like someone, I'm okay with like not being important anymore because like I'm a side character in someone else's story, right? Like, like it's very like in some ways it's very like straightforward and unsubtle, but like it doesn't, you know, it it's I don't want to say it's a metaphor really, right? But like it's about its own, it's about itself. Like as a viewer, I think a lot of the reasons why like other like where are they now type epilogues fail is because they don't get to the fundamental question of like what it is people want from an epilogue, right? Like when you look at an epilogue and it's just following the characters and it's like, hey, they're 10 years older now and now they have kids. What that is just like it's like a cock tease for like wanting more story. It doesn't give you closure, right? Unless you like, it's one thing like happily ever after endings can work for closure, but like, ultimately there's always the elephant in the room, which is that like, it's going to end eventually, right? Like, you know, there's sort of the, I don't know if this is like an apocryphal internet meme or whatever, but it it's I have seen it said that it was originally and they lived happily ever after until they died, right? Like there's the question that goes unanswered that is like, well, okay, so like they lived happily ever after, but like what then, and this is a story that actually kind of chooses to answer that question um, in a way that is like I think very well executed, and again it applies to itself in that like if you're looking for closure, you're not going to get it just by seeing a continuation of the story, but like a true end that's like look, like this is like what they left behind, like this is like what would make them okay with dying, Like this is what it looks like when someone like accepts dying or accepts like not seeing any more of a story, and like, we're gonna in okay, this is kind of rambly, but the point is, it tells the
No,
story
you're
of
good.
people who are
Ramble
okay
as
with
much as you
dying
need to.
and like okay with not seeing any more of a story, right? And that story is itself like the reason why the main characters of the previous story would be okay with dying or not seeing any more of their story, right? Like, you know, it good.
Yep. Good it.
Like if it was just, if it was a story, if it like the ending was like you see Shiki and Kokuto, even if it was about them like accepting death or them dying, right? I mean, it wouldn't have the same impacts because like it doesn't have that like quality to it of like, embodying its own theme. I don't know. I just think it gives it so much impact.
Yeah. I don't. It's really the most complete movie of the series.
Yeah. The crazy thing is like because of how much distance it has from like the main characters, that I think it honestly could work perfectly well in a vacuum, if not for needing background information about male Shiki to understand like the
Yeah.
ending.
And also just like being like, wait, how did she? What did she cut? What is that? How did she cut
Well,
that? Hold on, what?
to be fair, like I think if you're an anime viewer, that's probably
Oh yeah,
acceptable. It's like, all right, yeah, she cut his future, sure.
yeah. That you're not wrong.
Yeah, obviously it's like a little dodgy, but as far as like if I had to recommend any of these movies to someone, it would absolutely be this one, and I would be like, look, just know that there's some things you won't quite understand, and like just have a little bit higher suspension of disbelief, and it like probably works out because like you don't need to know like how she cut his future, like for it to be important. Like the what's interesting is that her explanation of how she did it afterward, like again, and this is what I meant when I said like it's one thing, often the dialogue is either exposition or like sounding cool, and it's not usually both. Like when she explains how she did it afterwards, it's like she's talking about theme, right? Like it's an explanation in the sense that it's like, yeah, like if you give the future form, then it becomes something that I can see and cut, right? So it's like, oh, this is wiki shit. But also like that's literally like a direct like statement of one of the movie's themes, right? Like I don't know. They
Yeah.
actually
No.
managed to talk in Shugam or to walk in Shugam at the same. I don't know what the saying is, but they multitask properly for once.
Yeah. Walk and chew gum at the same time.
Yeah. And of course it sounds cool too. I mean, it's a cool line for sure. I will say when she says that your your future was clearer than the ridges on a screw, that's kind of a cheesy line. It's definitely like I
Yeah.
get it. Oh, it's like a spiral, dude. It's like a spiral, but it's like a paradox, but it's a spiral, and it's a paradigm. Wah. That's definitely like kind of like a cheap callback, but I don't mind it.
Yeah.
All things considered.
It's relatively or it's quite unintrusive, I would say.
Yeah.
Um, Also, we got to see Daisuke being the only detective in the entire city.
Yeah. Well,
Once
of
again,
course. I mean, anytime the cops are involved, it's him.
he's the only one.
Even though it's implied that nobody ever died in these explosions, the homicide detective is on the job.
I mean, yeah.
Although, like again,
He's
I don't mind that at all. Like, because it fits with what the movie's doing. Like all the characters are appearing like, but kind of with a certain distance. I mean,
yeah,
I don't know. I guess you
good
could
movie.
interpret it just as being like a cameo, which is pretty standard, par for the course. But
Well, he
yeah,
doesn't even actually show up. Like, you don't actually really like. he just kind of like is that like there's like I mean he just like gets in the car is like let's go.
Yeah.
Like is that a kid? Does that count as a cameo?
Well,
I
he's
guess it
also at
does.
the end when so there's he shows up in three
Oh yeah,
places, right? Like first of all, Shiki like flips over his hood, the hood of his car.
yeah, that's
And
true.
second of all, he is like at the explosion, and then they like get in the car and they're like, "Let's go." And then he's also at the end when he like finds Mitsuru with his eye blinded.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
To me, that's all like the same
yeah,
cameo,
yeah,
but
yeah, yeah, yeah. It's a cameo. I mean, I think it may be a little bit too uh, generous to be like, "Oh yeah," like it's like how they keep all the main characters at a distance from the story. It's like, well, okay, I mean, he's the level of character that would just be getting a cameo normally.
yeah.
Yeah. I mean, he has more screen time in the third act than Kokuto, so we figured it out. This is how
Well,
we improve the series. Just remove Kokuto.
isn't there that scene? Isn't the last scene of the cafe in the third act when
Oh, it
she like looks
is.
at she
It
when he like looks
is.
at
You're right.
Shiki
Right.
and then
Right.
Seo looks at Shiki and she's like,
Yeah,
"That's a
I guess
bad
that's in the
bitch.
third act.
I better not fuck with this man's."
Yeah. Yeah, and I love all the little things, right? Like like what I said earlier when Toko is saying like, oh, if you have murderer B and victim A, and like a prediction wielder would look at the two of them and know what's going to happen even without like knowing their past or their history or their names, right? And then that happens exactly. It's like it's just fun little things like that.
And is there anything else other than like any other
um
like little stuff? I have no idea. Details.
well, like I mean, another thing exactly like that is that Toko is like, oh, and the one that Shiki has the best like matchup with is, and she's like, oh, but there's no point in talking about what ifs. And then later Shiki is like, like you're a bad matchup for me. Like
Yeah.
if it had been prediction, you maybe would have just killed me.
I was more thinking like, stuff like the fingers,
Meaningful things, yeah.
like visual tricks, visual
Not that come to
details.
mind right now. Yeah.
Yeah.
I guess
I
it's
don't
worth
usually
talking
notice
about the fact
tons
that
of
this
stuff like
is,
that on my first watch.
yeah. I mean, this is like the one instance of Singing in the Rain that I actually really like.
Yeah.
Um, it
It's
feels like that's
it's the
actually like how the
shortest, I
song.
think.
Yeah, for one thing, it's short. Like they actually like did sound direction with it. They're like,
For
all
one
right,
thing,
look, like this is gonna
Sakamoto
be a little
Maya
awkward.
can
Like
really sing.
just, sorry.
For another thing, Sakamoto Maya can really sing.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, she
Not
is like almost primarily a singer.
yeah.
Um, at this point, I don't know what like of course, who knows what she makes more money off of, but like yeah, she's a very prolific singer in addition to being a voice actor. Um, but and like so first of all they keep it short. Second of all, there's a long period of silence beforehand and after, I guess. And third of all, she's only humming it and not singing it. And fourth of all, the scene actually like fits at least my reading of the song, which is that it's like exclusively upbeat, right? Like
Yeah.
it's a scene where you might expect it not to be upbeat, but it is exclusive. It's not supposed to be like a, oh, like it's like happy and sad. It's just like, no, we're happy. Like we're 100% happy here.
Yep. I was waiting for a street lamp, but no.
Street
Alas.
lamp.
I assume you haven't seen the movie.
Like you're talking
The
about
movie Singing in the Rain.
yeah, Singing in the Rain. Like I feel like I roughly know what you're talking about, but yeah, sorry, that
Like Gene
reference.
Gene Kelly, like, foot on the base of the street pole, or
I think,
foot
yeah,
on like
like I
the
think I have that image in my
arm
mind, but
extended, like swinging around.
yeah,
Like
yeah, yeah. I
it's
definitely, I don't know that I've
iconic.
seen the movie, but yeah, I think I know exactly what you're talking
Yeah.
about now.
It's a Watson like frame or a Watson pose in Apex.
Oh yeah, that's true. It is. But yeah, and then like the after credit scene, the stinger, I really like. Um, you know, it serves a very different purpose to the rest of the after credit scenes in the series. I would say the one that it's most similar to is actually the after credit scene in one, in Fukan Fuke. Um,
I don't remember which one that was.
so the stinger in the first movie is Toko and Azaka at the scene of the of Fujino, or not Fujino,
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. Where she's like,
Kirie's
there's no
suicide.
reason. There's
Yeah,
there's
and
no
then
reason for
she's like,
suicide.
I
Or
don't
suicide
understand
has
people
no
who commit
reason.
suicide. Like what? And then
Yeah.
Toko's like, yeah, Jisatsu ni wa ryu ga nai, or ryu wa nai. I don't know, one or the other. Um, but yeah, the rest of the movies, like they usually use them to like tease stuff, or like, you know, like show that like Arya is up to something. Whereas
Yeah.
this movie just kind of uses it as a way of like, look, if you didn't understand what the theme was, here's a really straightforward visual metaphor. Um, Male Ski has just decided that he's okay with dying, and here's a shot of him walking into darkness. Please understand what we're trying to do here. Like, he looks into the sunrise, smiles, and then walks into the darkness. Like, what a great way to end the series.